This is AUGforums.com Real Talk. First, thank you to our sponsors, APS Payments, Kenzium, and DataSelf. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at augforums.com/sponsors. Every click helps to support this podcast. My name is Tim Rodman, and I'm coming to you live on Thursday, March 25th, 2021. This is episode number 43. Greg Lems, Director of Engineering at FoodMaven, sharing his Acumatica customer story. And I've got a bit of a cold today, but we are doing this over the phone in two different states, so I think we're socially distanced enough. Craig, thanks for coming on, and I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks for coming on, and I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. I am Greg Lems, Director of Engineering at FoodMaven. I have a background as a software developer. Started my career with General Motors, actually doing software development for them after getting my electrical engineering degree. Over the years, I grew into leadership and actually grew into startups as well. So sort of starting with General Motors, I worked for smaller and smaller companies after that, but I found the work more rewarding to be sort of more hands-on. In recent years, I've been diving into a few different fields. I was in healthcare for a little while. I was also doing affiliate marketing software, but recently I've gotten more into food. I found food to be really interesting. It's something that everybody needs, which I've been there for about 3 years, and we've grown to expand to a couple different cities, and it's been a really interesting, not just business experience, but technical experience as well. So I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Sounds interesting. So we got an electrical engineer. That sounds pretty geeky. But then you like the practical application of technology to food, and you're using Acumatica. I think this is going to be fun.
Yep.
So you've been there about 3 years. Did you come on board before selecting Acumatica or after Acumatica was already in place?
I was really right around the same time. I like to say that all startups, the system for all startups is the same, which is Excel. Even if you've gotten a bunch of money to go build just to start getting business through the door, and so a lot of companies just use spreadsheets. And before I arrived, that was what the company was using. And actually, then they had moved to some more sort of rudimentary hosted systems. But then we made the decision collectively to go to Acumatica right around the time that I started. So that was working with our CTO, Jason. We decided, our strategy was to grow, not just, we are in Colorado, I'm speaking to you from Colorado right now, but that was where we started. And our plan was to grow to other cities in the US. And we quickly realized that if we started doing that our current systems were not going to be able to support that. So we, undertook a project to evaluate enterprise systems, but at the same time, it's sort of that dichotomy of like, you want an enterprise system that's going to grow and scale. Enterprise systems, but at the same time, it's sort of that dichotomy of like, you want an enterprise system that's going to grow and scale with you, but also there's only so much you can afford. So looking at some of these, at some point we looked at Infor and others that are sort of larger, and the cost can get quite extensive there. NetSuite was another. So we really, sort of gravitated to Acumatica because of not just the cost, but also from a technology standpoint. It's super flexible, and we have, technical staff on board, me and others, and we wanted to be able to tie into it well. So that decision got made, luckily, pretty much right when I got started. So we hit the ground running.
Interesting you say Excel. Do you know if QuickBooks was even ever at play, or you went right from Excel?
move. So we were on QuickBooks when I got with the company. However, it's, some things made it into QuickBooks, but not everything. We also used an inventory management system called DEAR, DEAR, and Shopify as sort of the e-commerce front end. That was all before Acumatica, before we did that implementation.
And you having that electrical engineering background, I could see how the technology side of Acumatica would be attractive. But, I'm curious, being in the, well, maybe actually first you could kind of outline what FoodMaven does, and then maybe you could tell us, what specifically about Acumatica was attractive other than just the core stuff. How were you thinking, at least at the time, to utilize and plug into it?
Sure. Yeah, they're both very related. So what what FoodMaven does is we basically rescue food from being thrown away, or we prevent food from being discarded into landfills. And we do that by creating a marketplace. So we're for profit. We're not just trying to save food. We're trying to do it in a way that makes business sense. So 40% of food produced in the United States is wasted. So that's a shocking thing for a lot of people to hear, especially when you consider how important food is. There's all kinds of other side effects, not just the fact that we're wasting food, but also that food that goes into landfills just creates a terrible carbon burden, and the fact that if you have food that can be consumed, it should be. So what we did is we created a marketplace for food. We created a marketplace for food, and it's largely to institutions, restaurants, colleges, where we put food for sale that we have contracted with large food producers and suppliers to get it sold. And this is food that would normally be sort of lost in the big food system. There's a lot of, in big food, there's a lot of movement of product. And in a lot of cases, if somebody's not getting the right price for something, they prefer to just have it sit on the shelves rather than sell it. It's kind of a terrible thing. But what we do is come along and create relationships with a lot of those suppliers and say, hey, we'll sell that, probably 30 to 40% off, but we'll get it sold. And they really like that. They like the idea of having an outlet for selling that food. So there's kind of three basic groups of food that we sell. Imperfect is, doesn't, or sort of out of spec is another. And then local is another as well, which kind of surprises people. But a lot of local producers are just too small for the big food system to take in and support. So we work with a lot of local producers to make sure that their food can make it into a marketplace. So we take all that food from suppliers, and this is kind of where the tech comes in. If we're going to sell that food successfully, it has to be at a price that people will say, I'm going to save enough money buying that from FoodMaven that I want to buy it. So we sell it, like I said, at about 30% off in our marketplace. We have to make sure we stay on top of those numbers. If we're selling something, the price of chicken, for example, recently has been going up and up. But let's say it was going down. If we had a price of 30% off chicken, a month ago, and now it has changed a lot and dropped. Well, we need to adjust our prices too, or we're not going to sell any of it. And those prices, especially in food, really change a lot. So we have built a fair amount of our own code and technology. We have our own stack of apps written in Angular and Node that take in a lot of data from external sources like USDA and publicly visible e-commerce sites that have a lot of food pricing data. And we take that in, and then we turn that into the pricing that we're going to sell it to our customers for. In order to get that data turned around like that into pricing in front of our customers, we have to make sure that we can communicate with our ERP system and get the prices set right. And then that propagates out to our e-commerce system as well. Just so you're aware, our e-commerce system is Oro Commerce. which commerce system is Oro Commerce, which was created by the folks that did Magento, and they moved out and created a new e-commerce system. We like that one also because it interfaces a lot via API pretty easily. And then we have a warehouse management system on the back end, which is a Acumatica ISV called Rick Group WMS software.
How do you spell that e-commerce software one?
It's called Oro Commerce, O-R-O Commerce.
O-R-O, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And
your customers, like who you're taking food in from and then who you're selling it back out to. I assume this is all commercial. You're not trying to get into households and finding the broccoli on the plate of the kids who aren't eating their broccoli. I mean, how does that work? Like, where is there excess food to be found, and then who is interested in the excess food? I'm curious.
Yeah, there's excess food to be found. It's just nobody really advertises it, because by advertising it, they would say, look at how much we're eventually throwing away. So we have a lot of deep relationships with suppliers throughout the food chain to very large suppliers that everybody's heard of. So we focus very much on the supply side of things. There are some, I think, startups and other apps out there that have tried to do things like, hey, if you're somebody who has excess food, go and log into our app and tell us what food you have, and then you can sell it in our marketplace. We are less about that sort of quick on-demand turnaround than we are about just volume, and that volume is pretty significant as you talk with bigger suppliers and bigger players in the food chain. So we have pretty good relationships with large players, and then also, yeah, like you were saying, the consumers are largely, like I said, restaurants, institutions, colleges, hospitals. Again, people that can consume on a fairly large level. I have, as I mentioned in the very beginning, I worked for a smaller company for a company that was more B2C called Door to Door Organics, and that was about getting broccoli on the plate of kids who wouldn't eat it. I mean, obviously I'm oversimplifying, but that is about B2C, and that was super rewarding and interesting. But I will say that the minute Amazon bought Whole Foods, it was really difficult to make that play for folks, because it suddenly made delivery to people's homes really easy, and you could create a very wide assortment through them that was super. Matters a lot, and if you're going to sell in a marketplace, you have to make sure that there's enough volume there for it to make sense, and that you're not losing money on these transactions. So we do tend to sell to large institutions, which has created its own challenges during COVID with restaurants closing and all that kind of stuff. But it's been on a larger scale that we've been focusing.
So this sounds like industrial strength logistics going on here. And I'm curious, on the supplier side, is it as simple as they just bring it up to the dock and you take it from there? Or how involved are they in the process of even telling you what they have? Or is it just, hey, we know this is extra, we're just going to dump it here, and then you take care of organizing it, even the trucking part? How does that handoff work?
Yeah, it really varies by the vendor, and it's kind of all of the above. So we do have vendors that we're like, we'll take whatever you have. We'll take whatever you have, especially some of the ones that tend to have a lot of produce, because that's a popular item. But there are others that we regularly meet with and say, what do you anticipate having in the next, short period of time? We typically buy a lot, or we typically do a lot of that on consignment. So we will take it from that vendor, and then if we sell it, we pay them some fee. And then if we don't sell it, what we do is, again, what we're overall trying to prevent food from going to the landfill. What we will do is donate it or get it to an end state that is not waste. So that typically means that like an animal donation, animal farm, or animal sanctuary, or even composting are better alternatives than just throwing it in a landfill. So The vendors like this than just throwing it in a landfill. So the vendors like that too, because hey, if we're able to sell it, they get a fee back. But also if we're not, it goes to a place that's just, it's more environmentally responsible. So it really covers a lot of different, basically as we talk to vendors, we'll say, you know, what relationship works best for you. And if it's best for them to just show up with a donation, or I'm sorry, with you know, whatever their excess is, whatever their impact product is, we'll accommodate it.
And you might not know, not being on the finance side, but do you know if on the give it away scenario, if they at least get some tax benefit that comes back to them?
They do, yeah. They absolutely get to have that count financially for them.
So any way you go, it's better off than just throwing it away.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. I think it's really interesting. I think it's really interesting to me in that, you know, we're talking about food here, but anyone who carries inventory faces this to some degree or another. I think you're extra sensitive to it with food because it expires so quickly. But, you know, just how many companies are carrying inventory and they really have no idea of what that carrying cost is and how much of that inventory has been sitting there for a long time. And, you know, you hear them talk about wanting to sell it on eBay or get something out of it instead of just scrapping it. But in reality, I think the same thing happens with anyone carrying inventory. They just by default wind up scrapping it because it's just the easiest thing to do. So it sounds like your model is really interesting for anyone who's dealing with inventory.
Yeah, I think, you know, the fact that it's food makes it kind of a forcing function. You can't have it around for too long, with the exception of frozen. You can have frozen items around for quite some time, but yeah, the perishable produce stuff and refrigerated items, you just can't. So you need to come at it from a standpoint of, look, eventually everything's going to move out of here. We're either going to sell it or we're going to donate it or compost it or have other, you know, means. But it's going out. So let's just keep that wheel cranking.
Then how does Acumatica come into play? I could see for sure it coming in on the billing side and the financial dollar side, but are you also leaning on it heavily for quantity information? Is it really your inventory source of truth, including with the stuff that might not be your inventory, the consignment type of scenario, or do you have like, I'm curious specifically on the inventory side, how much of it is your system being the source of truth, just feeding back to Acumatica, or how much are you actually leaning on Acumatica for that?
Purchase order for it, and actually this was one of the things that we liked about Acumatica is how much we could customize. So we customized our purchase orders in Acumatica to be able to have consignment. And to make it even more difficult, you know, you order by the case, but you receive by the pound in meat in a lot of cases. So we have catch weight to deal with. So so we did some customizations there, but ultimately what we do is we say, all right, we're doing a purchase order. All these items are, you know, consignment, and then we record in the system what the fee is, so the percentage, and it can vary by vendor, of what we're ultimately going to wind up paying them once we sell it. And so then, you know, on top of that, we build reporting on the back end to say, all right, of these, you know, let's say 100 cases of product that came in at X% of fee, at X% of fee, we sold, you know, 70 of them. And let's take the prices that we sold them at and figure out what that fee is. That's what we pay back to the vendor, or tell the vendor to invoice us for it. And then, you know, the rest of it, we can also handle the financial aspects of, okay, that was a donation, and then how do we do the reporting around that to make sure it's recognizable tax-wise and all that. So it does make it more complicated, but we do have it all in our own system. Our WMS, you know, reads the barcodes for what's coming in as consignment, and then we put our own labels on it that have our own GS1, 128 barcodes and the weight and all that stuff. It's a FoodMaven label.
Interesting. So maybe let's geek out a little bit more on details here. First question I'm wondering is the consignment scenario. Is that just as simple as having a warehouse Is that just as simple as having a warehouse in Acumatica that's consignment, or do you do a separate warehouse for each vendor? Do you just exclude the warehouse for reporting purposes, so you're not reporting it as part of your inventory? How do you handle the consignment in Acumatica?
Yeah, we have both consigned items and items that we purchased, but they all show up on the marketplace for sale, so they're all in the same warehouse. We don't have to, we have every item labeled, so we can trace it back to, is this a consignment item or is it not? So they're all in the same warehouse. As we go to sell those items, their inventory shows up as sellable or not. When we go to fulfill an order, the customer places the order. They don't know if it's consignment or not. There are certain products that we actually have to buy in order to make sure we have supply, so that if you're a restaurant, you need some certain items. We have some of those, and sales happen every day. We scan all those items out, and at the end of that, every day we can generate reports that say, okay, of the X number of items that went out today, these were consignment, and they count towards the fee that we'll pay back to the vendor, or no, we already bought those are ours, and we can analyze margin and that kind of stuff on those products.
Interesting. So when you go to report inventory, and this might be more of a finance thing, but when finance has to report their inventory balance, you wouldn't include the consignment items in there. Do you know how they would exclude those? Sounds like it's on an item by item basis.
Yeah, all the items that we have in inventory have a flag and a value for consignment and for amount. So they would easily be able to see that these are items that we haven't that we either haven't purchased or will be purchasing later. And yeah, I don't actually know the specific details of how they manage that, but I can say that through reporting, we can, at any moment in time, we can look at all of our inventory and say, what is consignment? What's the fee for it? And then also, what is not consignment and how much did we pay for that?
Interesting. Then on the fee side, it sounds like that's a simple percentage. Is that something you store on the purchase order line? And then does it actually flow through to a lot number and become an attribute on that? Or how does that part work?
It does, because, and I can tell you're thinking ahead. I can see the gears turning. But it does, because the fee could change. We could have a single SKU that 1 month is a certain fee, and then another month is a different fee from the same vendor. So yeah, we pull them into lots, and then there's a bunch of lot level information that, again, we customize the system to be able to store, and one of those is consignment fee.
And do you know if you're using, there's something out on GitHub that allows you to put attributes on lots. Do you know if you're using that, or did you build your own mechanism for that?
We built our own. Yeah, I have not looked out on GitHub. We started all this in 2018, and we were pretty amped to get going quickly, and so we had worked with some subcontractors that had done some Acumatica work before. So we got that built through our own contractors. But now that we are sort of settled down, we are kind of wanting to dive more into doing the Acumatica side of development ourselves. And that's definitely a thing we're going to look into, is some of the tools that might be just kind of out there in GitHub that are available.
In-house, I'm curious at this point, how big are you maybe in terms of ballpark number of employees?
We're around about 80 to 100 employees. A lot of those are warehouse staff. I think the number of folks that we have kind of on the technical side is really just kind of 3 or 4. But like I said, we do have contract people available. But at the same time, as I kind of referred to in the beginning, like, since I came up on the software side, I always kind of want to dive into it more myself anyway. And although we need to scale and have leadership and management there that I also do, it'd be far cooler to just code this stuff all day. So we kind of go back and forth between how much of this can we figure out ourselves, and how much do we have to pull somebody else in for. But I'm already kind of starting down the path of getting Acumatica developer certified. getting Acumatica developer certified. So we'll see how long it takes me to get done with that, but it's an interesting process.
Interesting. Yeah, so you mentioned some Angular and Node apps. Where you're at now, sounds like you're a couple years into this, or a few years into this. What's your current stance on leaning more on the outside apps versus, is your trajectory to try to bring more of it into the Acumatica platform?
I think we'd bring the output of it into the Acumatica platform more, so that it's more easy to access. But what we've found so far is what we need to do to properly, sort of quantify food. We really have had to do a lot of our own custom coding that I'm not sure would be worth it to try to put into Acumatica. As you look around for prices of things, there's so much normalization you have to do. Ground beef is, the most popular kind of ground beef is 80-20, 80 lean, 20 fat. But then suddenly you have a customer that wants 92-8 or something. Nobody's selling 92-8, but how do you extrapolate the data that's out there? Well, certain people maybe have sold that in the past, but they sold it, by the hundreds of pounds. But now you have a customer who only wants 40 pounds of it. How does that change the price? You have all these attributes around, ABF is antibiotic free, but there's also another metric called never ever, which means this animal has never been exposed to antibiotic. You would expect ABF to be been exposed to antibiotic. You would expect ABF to be if it says antibiotic free, well, they've never had it. Well, no, actually, the government defines that as they haven't had it within this certain amount of time before they were processed.
I wouldn't have expected that either.
So all this stuff, unfortunately, results in a lot of custom work that we do there. There probably is some possibility for getting that into Acumatica, but what we ultimately are doing is creating data for that marketplace. And I think once the data is ready for the marketplace, that's the point where it's ready to get into Acumatica. So what we're interested in more is like the integration in terms of how we code with Acumatica. We've built a whole bunch of push notifications and generic inquiries that integrate with our e-commerce system, that integrate with our warehouse management system, and that generate reports on a regular basis that go out, and their application usage needs. But as far as the specific data around how we do our data around food in the marketplace, I haven't seen a way to do it other than to build it ourselves.
Well, that makes sense to me. I was kind of hoping you would say that, actually. And that I think when you're building something that's got to be a brain, that is such a custom thing. Yeah. I would think the Acumatica framework would be a little too punky for that. I mean, it really is designed for an ERP system, and your brain, I think, makes sense that it lives outside, but it sounds like you're looking to leverage Acumatica more as the interface internally for your employees, which also makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I think the challenge too is around sort of technology platform. Like you mentioned, we're doing Angular and Node, and Acumatica, of course, is .NET and C#, and I think any kind of integration effort you do these days has to make sure you rely on standards like SOAP and all that stuff. But we do, I really want to see into the database in Acumatica sometimes, especially after we've done customizations, and you kind of can't get around that. That you have to get down to the data level. So I imagine we're going to have to do some amount of, people knowing lots of different languages and platforms. We can't really, when you integrate this many tools, you can't really say, well, we're an Angular shop or we're a Microsoft shop or whatever. You kind of have to say, well, we do it all, so that the end result is smooth to our users.
Yeah, for each situation, you've got to be aware of all the tools available and which one makes sense for that particular situation.
Yep.
What about on the customer side? So, it sounds like Acumatica is more your interface internally. and which one makes sense for that particular situation.
Yep.
What about on the customer side? So, it sounds like Acumatica is more your interface internally. And I don't know that this would make sense, but do you have any thoughts on where you go with the customer-facing side of it? Is that all your custom piece, or do you look to use the Acumatica customer portal? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think where we would be most likely to use, so our customers today use the e-commerce interface for the most part. So that's through Oro Commerce. And that has all of your sort of typical e-commerce capabilities, the ability to quickly change and update prices and inventory levels, but it looks slick. It has a nice carousel, a nice ability for us to change how the interface looks. And on Acumatica is actually sort of on the supplier side. So not only do we have customers buying things, but we have suppliers supplying to us, and that is typically more of a I don't know if nuts and bolts is the right term, but it's basically what do you have that we could sell, and sort of tell us more about it, as opposed to some of the more nuanced things that customers are looking for, specific cuts of meat or that kind of thing. So yeah, we have not. We have used Acumatica pretty much exclusively internally, but there's no reason why we couldn't broaden that out as we look at other functionality.
I think it all makes sense. I personally am not a huge fan of the Acumatica customer portal. It's B2B at best, in my opinion. And an e-commerce site is just so much better designed for that user interface and what people are so far ahead when it comes to an ERP system, a back office ERP system and that user interface. But for anyone on customer or client side, e-commerce, that makes sense as the area to invest in and have that be that face for your organization.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think I watched the Acumatica preview of what they're working on next, run by the CTO, and I was excited to hear that they're working on the UI, because the UI is tough for people to use, where I constantly have to tell people like, well, okay, I know you typed in that number, but now you have to tab out of that field. And they're like, what? Are you serious? Like there's just certain idiosyncrasies to it that I think would make it hard to get in front of customers. And I realize that they probably have tools that are a little more polished to get in front of customers, but we went with Acumatica because of its integration capabilities and its technical abilities, and not its user interface capabilities. But I'm happy to hear that they're focusing on those.
And are you running the SaaS version, or are you hosting it somewhere yourself?
We are running the SaaS version, which makes it difficult to, like I said before, see the data. I understand why they have to keep access limited for security purposes to databases, but it makes it rough sometimes if we want to be able to run our own queries on the database. So that's something we've been thinking about, is would it bring us value to host it ourselves somewhere? And we host other things through cloud providers, like our WMS runs other things through cloud providers, like our WMS runs in a cloud provider. So we may do something like that in the future. But I will say it's nice not to have to worry about that, about software updates and who's doing backups and that kind of stuff. We've been pleased with the level of service from Acumatica hosting.
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely nice not having to deal with that part. I know they used to offer the ODBC option, and some people are grandfathered in. It sounds like you do not have the ability to just query the database directly.
No, that'd be cool. I'd love that, but I'd also probably then start hammering them with tons more questions. So maybe it's not worth it for them.
Sometimes it's better not to know.
Right.
I know there's one out there that I haven't used personally. I think it's from see data, and it's an ODBC driver that talks through the APIs somehow. I don't know how that works, but it sounds like your interest is querying interest, and it's not necessarily go insert data yourself. You would maybe still use the APIs for that. This is read-only statements and queries. Is that correct?
Yeah, it'd be more like that. You and I actually met in, I think, 2018. You came out to the Rocky Mountain User Group conference and met me and this guy Tom that we had on our team. And I remember talking at that time and somebody brought up, like, I'm trying to get a copy of the Acumatica schema and nobody will give it to me. Is that still a thing that it's hard to get a hold of, or can you now find it?
I'm glad you said that, because I'm trying to figure out why your voice is familiar to me. So that's what feedback ideas. I have seen them make some progress, but I still haven't seen a diagram.
Right.
It might exist out there somewhere. I know that the last person I talked to at Acumatica about it was years ago, so I'm out of date on this. But what was interesting to me is I was talking to one of the developers in Moscow, and he was showing me all the stuff that they had tried. I mean, they had spent a significant amount of time trying to do it, and what they were doing is using the data access classes to do it, because that's really technically how you should do it, right? You're documenting the data access classes, not the database itself. And they had all these different approaches they had tried, and the problem was how long it took to generate. Like, it took all overnight to generate it. And, they were doing it with the view of making sure they could auto-generate it after every new build, because they released so quickly, right? So that was years ago. Tried to schema, but I don't know if you noticed this, I have seen, I don't know when, but in fairly recent versions, you can at least easily get to the primary keys on a data access class. Still not a diagram, but in my experience, when I'm trying to join, that's the main thing I'm looking for. What's the primary key on the other end of it? And you can get to that a lot more easily now.
That's great. So, that's really good to hear. And like, they have some of that functionality with regard to developers is great. Like, on any screen, you can hit a certain key sequence and see where that field is being pulled from the database, which is awesome. And there's a lot of, like, NetSuite doesn't do that I know of, but other tools I would think sort of keep that private. So the openness is there. It sounds like, from what you're saying, that it's just so big that it's hard to generate.
Yeah, that's my. It'd be great to hear more of an update from someone at Acumatica on that. I think what's missing is the diagrams. Right?
Yeah.
A big visual wall map, that you can maybe purchase and roll it out, like a 8x6 foot type of thing. That would be pretty cool.
They need an AR version that you can just walk through, and with your goggles on.
That'd be really cool. That would be really cool. Have you seen anything like that? I've never even thought of that idea.
I haven't for data models. I have my daughter's in college and she's taking an anatomy class, and for COVID, they actually, normally they work on cadavers, and they did still maintain some of that. However, for the most part, they give every student a set of goggles and they download the app, and she was showing me how you walk through, the muscles and the tendons and the limbs, and it was extremely realistic. But I have not seen that for data models.
Very interesting. Pictures worth 1,000 words. Yeah, that'd be really cool. Wonder how difficult it'd be to generate that. Good idea.
Yeah, a lot of data.
You mentioned COVID there, so I'm curious, impact on FoodMaven the last year. What has that done to food supply and demand? Is that more growth for you, or things kind of taking a dip? What's it like for y'all there?
Yeah, I think it's definitely been a challenge. Especially when it first hit. A lot of restaurants closing down, a lot of our customers closing down. And in the very beginning, entire meat plants closing down. So that was definitely a challenge. We did some things to roll with that. It became apparent as entire meat plants closing down. So that was definitely a challenge. We did some things to roll with that. It became apparent as grocery store shelves started clearing that there was a demand for B2C folks, members of our community to buy food in larger quantities. There were people who wanted to get, a 40-pound box of chicken breasts, frozen chicken breasts, because they couldn't get it at the store. So we did actually open, and it's still open, like a small B2C portal for customers that are in our area in Colorado, that they can buy those items from. But as COVID has worked, it's kind of going through its progression. Things have settled down. Restaurants are starting to open up, and there's less, of this situation of scarcity at grocery stores. So we're back focusing on our primary business, and I think as we see the restaurants opening up, that business will pick up, and that'll be good. But it has been a challenge for us. It's been definitely anytime don't see coming. Nobody saw that coming, and we're dealing with it the best we can.
Well, if you survived the past year, which it sounds like you did, sounds like hopefully the worst is behind us. I mean, if you rolled with that, I think you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, here's open.
And you said you're maybe close to 100 employees now. How many people would you say are actually using Acumatica on a day-to-day or at least week-to-week basis?
Probably 50 to 60.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good number of people in there using the system. So I could see how it would make sense that you're potentially bring a developer in-house to help strengthen that interface of what people are able to pull out of Acumatica.
Yeah, and a developer that other systems as well, like the ones we're developing on our own, or even the e-commerce system. It's just tough. I know you probably hear this all the time, and I know you're a consultant, and I've listened to some of your podcasts before. Like, if you're a customer who has done customizations in Acumatica, and suddenly you realize you need a new customization, you want it yesterday. And to go to your partner and say, okay, look, I need this customization, it has to do this and this. And they go, well, okay, let's research it. And if you have a partner that subcontracts the development work, then it's kind of a game of telephone. You explain it to the partner, and then they explain it to the person doing the work. And then, well, it takes some turnaround time. We got to fit that into priorities. And, it's going to take a little while. Meanwhile, your business is saying, no, we need this right away. So if you can own the development resources, you can own the priority. You can just say, look, this is your number one priority, and we need to get this done. The downside is you need somebody who's really good with Acumatica, and typically, a development shop is going to be better and suited to deal with that. And you could train somebody up, and then they could just leave and maybe go to an Acumatica development shop. So we're sort of balancing all that out now. We've certainly been able to get built what we need to get built. It's just never as fast as we want to. And then if there's issues down the line, which, it's technology, so there always are issues, does take a while to work through as well. So it's a balance. I don't know. Have you seen many people bring Acumatica in-house, the development?
I'd say it's probably more unusual than it is common, right? Yeah, and I think there's another piece to add there, in that it's not just a one-time investment, right? I mean, you have to keep up the skill, right? I mean, you have to keep up the skills. They get dusty, and if you haven't used it in 6 months, sometimes you're getting back up to speed on it is just as long as the lead time of going out to a development shop. But I saw on your LinkedIn profile, I think you put DevOps in your LinkedIn profile, and someone who does that, there's no way outside it's going to be fast enough for you. I can see that side for sure. Yeah.
I mean, we want, we have on the AWS side for our homegrown apps, we have, cloud formation set up to build our infrastructure as code. We have cloud deploy and GitHub all tied together, and it's beautiful. Like if you can get that set up, then you can deploy things really quick. But the downside is then you get used to deploying things really quick, and now everything else seems terribly slow.
Yeah, so I could see how you'd be looking to do that, and stuff that people don't do it. From what I see, it's less common than people just using contractors for it. But especially a company whose real core product is the technology, that does make a lot of sense. You'd be looking to bring it in house.
Yep.
What about other third-party products that you wound up using? It sounds like a lot of it is build it yourself, but you mentioned the RIC group on WMS. Was there any other third-party ISV products that you ended up using?
We have a few related to distribution, like Samsara. It's not really an integration. It's a very loose integration, but that basically manages our truck fleet. So we have orders that go out every morning into a few dozen trucks, and so we track which orders went into which trucks and how long it's going to be for them to get to each customer, routing and all that kind of stuff. They also have temperature monitors in the trucks since we're dealing with perishable items. Yeah, there was a delivery application. We have different when a order is placed, there's a lot of restrictions that can happen with regard to the geography of where that order is from. So we have certain trucks that go out to certain zip codes on certain days of the week. So if you're a customer ordering on Tuesday, but there's not a truck going out your way until Friday, we built a small application back actually when we were still on QuickBooks to do that. And it turned out that just integrating that into Acumatica was going to be easier than having to bring all that in and build it between Samsara and Acumatica. So a simple integration with that delivery app as well. But yeah, that's really, HubSpot. So we do some lead tracking and management. It's funny because pretty much every tool out there, it seems, has a CRM component if you want it. So Acumatica has one. Oro Commerce, which we use for our front end, has it. I wouldn't be surprised if our WMS had it in there somewhere. Everybody has a CRM that they would like you to use. But ultimately, HubSpot gave us what we needed, really in terms of abandoned cart functionality and ability to do the kind of outreach to our customers that we wanted. So everybody had the basics that were fine, but we really wanted to take advantage of all of the digital capabilities that a modern CRM comes with. And if you're going to have that kind of close attention paid to your customers, HubSpot is still kind of the best collection of that we've seen. That may change as time goes on, and I know everybody's been improving theirs as well. So we could reevaluate that at some point. But we do have a HubSpot integration between Acumatica and also Oro Commerce.
I'm curious on that, since you mentioned HubSpot. I know they do, especially the emails, a lot better than Acumatica does, the email marketing side. So what about, you also mentioned, I think, push notifications, business events, things that Acumatica would be better positioned to send a notification to the customer on. Do you somehow flow that through HubSpot so it's still capturing all communication with the customer?
We will eventually. That is definitely the plan. Right now, that's mostly just through the e-commerce tool, because that's where the customer, sort of email that comes back to them is from the e-commerce system. We do weekly specials and all that stuff. That's out of HubSpot directly. But yeah, there's no reason why we couldn't say, in Acumatica, let's say we realize that this customer wants this product whenever it's below some price. When that price triggers, we can certainly set up a generic inquiry and a push notification to say to HubSpot, hey, send an email to this customer. That way, like you said, it's all communications are through one platform. but the trigger for it comes from Acumatica. That would be, I think, super easy to do.
Yeah, it seemed like with something as perishable as food, that those notifications, not just that portal that you can log into, but those notifications that hit you with an email or hit you with a text hit you with an email or hit you with a text message would be a critical piece to what you're building there.
Yep, for sure. And we just recently got onto, we're typically a release or two behind, but we upgraded to 2019 R2, and that had the text capability in it as well, which is great. Text, I think, is, you don't have to worry as much about sort of like, does it present well? It's really just some text and probably a link in it. So we have done some of that out of Acumatica.
Very interesting. I could geek out all day on this stuff, but I know we're coming up to the top of the hour. Anything else that you can think of that you wanted to mention to folks about what you're doing and maybe even some of the struggles that you're having?
No, I think we covered it. It's always an adventure, and it's always super exciting. It's always super exciting to see the new things that they're coming up with on the Acumatica side of things. Of the last, January 2020 was the last Acumatica user group conference, and that was actually like the last time I traveled. But it was the first conference that I went to, so it was great to talk to folks about their solutions and meet some of the faces behind the names. And I'm looking forward to getting back to that as COVID starts to wane here, hopefully, and we're all able to travel again. Yeah, it was great talking to you about this and sharing our experiences.
What's your comfort level so far with going to the summit in Las Vegas in July for Acumatica?
Yeah, I have to assess that with the family, but we'll all be vaccinated soon here in our family, so that'll increase our comfort level. But travel is probably just something we need. To talk about. But I don't feel bad about it. I think it feels to me like things will be under control by then.
Yeah, I'm similar. Not sure yet, but growing more and more optimistic. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, thanks again for coming on today. I appreciate you taking the time.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Well, that's it for now. We'll catch